Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, Kira. Okay, so good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elaine Alec, and I am from the Penticton Indian Band. My late mother is Sophie Alec from the Penticton Indian Band from the Syilx or the Okanagan Nation. And my late father is Saul Kenzie Basil from the Bonaparte Indian Band from the Siquatm Nation. And I am calling in from Kamloops, BC. And I'm just very happy to be here. I love the CCP workshop. I've been involved in the CCP workshop since 2009. I think the first CCP workshop was held in West Bank in 2008. So I just wanted to get started. So I wanted to get started by sharing a story that I always share. And I share this diagram. Oh, I didn't even, of course, I didn't pull it up, so I can't share that way. So before every session, I share a story from the Syilx Nation called the Four Food Chief story, or how food was given. And this story is one of our creation stories that has teachings in it about governing, about decision-making and how we come together. And a huge part of governing and a huge part of decision-making is how we communicate with each other and how we listen to each other. And so when I share this diagram, I always tell people, this is our CCP. This is our communications plan. This is our conflict resolution plan. This is our healing plan. And once you hear the story and the teachings around this diagram, you'll start to see how it falls into those groups. So before people were here, there were animal people. And animal people roamed the earth, and they heard that there were going to be people coming. And so they all took on different roles to make sure that the earth was prepared for the people to be. And out of those animal people, there were four chiefs. There was Chief Black Bear, who was chief of all things that walked on the land and flew in the air. Chief Bitterroot was the chief of all things that grew below ground. Chief Saskatoonberry was chief of all things that grew below ground. And Chief Spring Salmon was the chief of all things that lived in the water. Just before I keep going, if you could turn or mute your mic so I don't get any feedback. I'm hearing background noise from somebody. So if you can just check your settings to make sure that you're on mute. So one day the creator came to the chiefs and said, there's going to be a being that comes, and you have to figure out how to keep this being alive. And so the creator left the being between the chiefs and left. And the chiefs looked at the being and said, this is the most pitiful excuse for a being we've ever seen. It's born with no fur to keep it warm. It's born with no teeth to eat. It's born with no claws to protect itself. It's born with nothing in its head. How are we supposed to keep this being alive? And so the chief sat there and they thought about it for a long time. And they said, well, Chief Black Bear, you're the oldest. You tell us what to do. And so Chief Black Bear sat there and thought about it for a while and said, I'm going to lay my life down for this being, and everything that I am, it can have. It can have my meat, it can have my fur, it can have my claws, it can have whatever it needs to keep itself alive. And so all the other chiefs agreed that they would do the same thing. And so Chief Black Bear said, I'm going to lay my life down now, and you have to sing me back to life. And so Chief Black Bear laid his life down, and the chiefs sang their song, and Chief Black Bear didn't come back to life. And so all of the other animal people came, muskrat and squirrel and deer and eagle, they all came to sing their song. And still Chief Black Bear didn't come back to life. Finally, the last being came. Let me sing my song. I want to sing my song. And it was Fly. And everybody was shooing him away. Go on, get out of here. Nobody wants to hear your song. All you do is eat crap and bug people. Nobody wants to hear your song. And Fly managed to get in anyway and sat on Chief Black Bear's ear and sang his song. And Chief Black Bear came back to life. And what that story tells us is that even the most small and insignificant being, even his voice was just as powerful as the chief's voice. And that when we take the time to listen to the songs and the voices of all people, that we are so powerful that we can bring back life. And so this story tells us and guides us in how we need to gather, who we need to include, and who we need to listen to, even Fly, even the small and insignificant being, the bug that bothers us, the one who, gets in the way or nobody wants around. Even Fly is needed to bring back life to our people. So each of the chiefs represents a perspective type. Chief Black Bear represents tradition. And traditional people are the knowledge keepers and the storytellers. They are the ones who remember the way things have always been done. They are the corporate memory. They like structure, they like rules. Chief Saskatoonberry is the innovation perspective. They are the ones who think outside the box. They look at systems. They try to figure out how to change things. People often think that they're crazy. Innovative people are constantly trying to find ways to fit within other people's way of thinking, and their brain goes off in a million questions when you ask them one. Tradition and innovation are polar opposites, and they often have conflict, and they communicate very differently. Chief Spring Salmon represents the action perspective. And the action perspective are the people who say, we've been talking about this for 30 years. Let's just get on with it. We need to act. We need to move. We need to, just start moving. Chief Bitterroot represents the relationship perspective, who like to slow things down and remember people and connect with each other and say, we can't leave these people behind. Relationship and action are polar opposites, and they often have conflict. And so what this teaching and what these stories tell us is that we recognize that there's different people in our communities who have different ways of communicating, different ways of speaking, and different ways of hearing things. And so if you were to ask a group 4 questions, each of those groups would answer the questions differently or hear the question differently. And so when you're planning on ways to communicate with your community and get information out there, it's really good to try to pull a planning team together that has those different perspective types in your group. And so they can help you format questions so that all of those perspective types will understand what you're asking. And now Kinwich is really, it's not a linear process. And so, when you're utilizing colonial or patriarchal type processes, they're really based on fear. And they're based on control and how to measure an outcome. And often they format questions to keep you with like streamlined in here so they can measure it. They can measure exactly what you're doing. This process is based on egalitarian teachings and matriarchal teachings, which are love-based, which is built on a foundation of trust, well-being, inclusion, validation, freedom, really trusting the people in your community, even the ones that you don't like, even the ones you don't get along with. And it tells us that all of those people are important and that they have purpose. And so, when you're working with people, if you're able to work from that space and listening with an open heart and an open mind, without judging what the people are saying and understanding that they have purpose in the process, it's easier to work through, a lot of the difficult stuff that happens in communities, especially when it comes to lateral violence and bullying and the challenges that happen in our community. You'll see the circle, the nested system that a lot of our communities utilize to share the way we need to plan, which is there's the individual at the center, the family outside of that, the community outside of that, and the Timuhulach or land outside of that. And you can't plan for one without planning. You can't plan for one without planning for the other. And I think one of the most important pieces to look at is that we're so busy focusing on family, community, land. How do we fix that? You know, we're working 12 to 18-hour days and we're wearing 10 different hats, wondering why things don't change. And we forget that the very core, the very center of our system is us, the individual. And so really understanding to be self-aware in how you react and how you're creating safe space for people to share and communicate and actually trust you with their feelings and their visions and their dreams of what they want for community. And understanding that, you know, there's a lot of trauma in our communities that prevents us from being open and trusting. And understanding that, you know, when we're working from a place of trauma, when we don't feel safe, we end up, when we're experiencing post-traumatic stress, or you know, we're just triggered, our brain goes down to thinking from the lower bottom part of our brain, which prevents us from thinking clearly. You know, if you've ever been triggered or experienced PTSD, you'll know that it's hard to concentrate, it's hard to think, it's hard to plan. You know, when I experience it and go through it, I can open up a very simple document that needs to be filled out and I won't even know how to fill it out because my brain can't function at that level because I'm experiencing a post-traumatic stress just, you know, episode. And so when people feel safe and when you're able to create a space where people feel safe and they feel like they're able to be open and they feel like they're included and they feel like their feelings are validated, when they have a sense of freedom and they have a sense of well-being, they're able to move from that lower part of their thinking into their space of power, where they can really tap into who they are as an individual and their strengths and how they see things, and they can be confident in sharing with people. And so, you know, in order to create a safe space, you have to be a safe space. And in order to be a safe space, you need to understand that we all have triggers and we're all human. And so when we do the now can we process, one of the first questions we ask is "Stimas puus?" And that is, what is on your heart? And that is a clear acknowledgement that what is on your heart is important in governing, it's important in decision making. Whereas in, you know, colonial patriarchal systems of business and politics, you're not allowed to cry at the table. You're not allowed to be emotional. You have to leave pieces of yourself behind in order to sit at that table to be taken seriously. Whereas our systems tell us, "Stimas puus, who are you? What is on your heart? What is you? Who are you? Who do you belong to?" And it helps us tap into that identity and that sense of belonging. And when we have a strong sense of belonging, we have self-confidence and we're able to step forward without, you know, worrying too much. We all do, but without worrying too much about judgment. Because when we worry about people judging us, we withhold and we don't share fully who we are because we're worried somebody will make fun of us, or if we're vulnerable, they'll think we're weak or that we can't handle it, or, you know, we fear if we share what's on our heart, people will think we're crazy and they'll take away our kids if they know I'm struggling. And so this is a constant that our people go through in our community. And many of us, and I've experienced this myself, you know, have only one concern, and that's, how am I going to feed my family tonight? And can't think beyond today and can't dream, you know, what tomorrow is going to look like or the next year is going to look like, because we're so entrenched in what's happening in the moment, in today, and trying to feed our families. So I think a really big part of communication and engagement in our communities is really understanding that foundation of healing and understanding what trauma is, what complex post-traumatic stress disorder is, what PTSD is, and even what vicarious trauma and resiliency is. You know, as helpers, as frontline workers, we're constantly experiencing vicarious trauma and not always sure how to work through it. And so, you know, I think of those things when we talk about going into community and working from that place, and then understanding those different perspectives and understanding that we all communicate in different ways, that we're storytellers and oral teachers, that, you know, you can't rely on one form of communication and say, well, I put it in the newsletter and if they don't come, they don't come. Because you need to find so many different ways to communicate with community. And I think one of the number one things that I tell CCP coordinators is get yourself a planning team. That's the number one thing you need to have as a planning team, because working in community, especially in your own community, is hard. It's mentally, spiritually, physically draining. You're not working 9 to 5 hours, because people can't always meet at that time because they're working. And so when you're setting up meetings, finding different days through the week to have them, mornings, afternoons, and evenings, weekends, breakfast meetings, things like that, so that different groups of people are able to interact with you at different times. And it's totally okay if only one person or two people show up, because that might be the only time that they're ever able to show up. And they would, that feeling of being accepted and having an option for them to participate changes how they're going to interact with you and share with you that you were willing to be lenient with when you were going to meet with your community members, and they're more willing to share more openly with you, and willing to show up and willing to support as you move through the process. So that piece, thinking about, all that time that we're going to spend in community talking to people, you're going to need a team, because it's so easy to burn out doing everything. I remember when I was a CCP coordinator, I was organizing, we were setting up, we were cleaning up, we were, printing all the copies off, sending out the invites, hosting the space. People would leave, we'd have to clean everything up and check off the list at the band hall, and then make sure everything was taken care of, and then lock up. And that's a lot of work to do by yourself. And so having a planning team really helps as you move through the process. And in our process and in our planning team, we chose community members. We actually put a call out to community members, but we wanted representatives from the different families. And so we chose people that were from the different families in our community. We wanted to make sure we had men, women, elders, and youth. So we had a male rep and a female rep. And then we had a rotating elder from the different families that would come in and be a part. And then we would also offer them training, facilitation training, chairing training, different type of now can we training, so that they would feel comfortable going out and hosting their own sessions. Because one of the things that I had to be honest with right off the bat is not everybody's going to like me. I'd like to think everybody likes me and that everybody thinks I'm a safe space, but the reality is some people are just not going to like me, and they won't show up to my meetings because I'm there or I'm hosting it. And so having a planning team where everybody has some training to host a session, so that people who don't like me will go to someone else's session, and they can still contribute and be a part of the process. And also understanding your planning team shouldn't be your buddies and your friends and people who think like you. They should be people who have the traditional perspective, the relationship perspective, the action perspective, the innovation perspective, and the fly. The outspoken person who comes in and everybody's like, oh my God, the person who's really hard to work with, because their voice is just as important. And if you can figure out how to create a team where you can work with that group of people, it makes it so much easier for you to understand when you're going out to community to work with them. And then having that grounding in these teachings. And so I always have this diagram with me wherever I go. I take it, if I don't have my diagram with me, I draw it in my book when I'm at a meeting to remind me that this is the system that we need to follow. This is the way we need to make decisions. These are the voices we need to listen to. So I'm always checking back with this. When I'm making my agenda, are the questions that I'm creating, do they fall into line with the different perspectives? So am I asking a tradition question? Am I asking a relationship question? Am I asking an innovation question? Am I asking an action question? So when those perspectives come, they'll see themselves in it and they'll get excited to participate in the way that they understand. So when I give questions out, say I give 4 questions out, I never try to define or explain what those questions are. So when I break them out and they say, well, what do you mean by this question? I share with them, it's not what I want from you, it's how you're reading it and how you understand it and where you're at. What is your experience? You answer it in the way you understand it. And if you need to rephrase the question so that it makes sense to you, do that. Because we don't want to control the way people are answering questions. We want them to really feel confident in themselves and not feel like they're stupid or dumb or they don't understand or they don't fit in, or, you know, especially with the innovation group who think so outside the box when everybody's on a roll talking about something. The innovation person's like, I really want to share something, but it's so out there. I feel like I'm going to throw the group off. And so creating space where people can really come and share and get excited about, you know, the way that we're coming together and planning and the topics that we're talking about. So another example of that, of engagement, meaningful engagement, one of the explanations or descriptions for meaningful engagement is meaningful engagement means including people from the very beginning or the conception of the idea. So even asking them to help you form the questions as you move through the process, and also making sure they know what you're talking about. So being educated about the topic or having some kind of understanding about the topic. I'm really trying to get communities to move out of working around sectors and silos. You know, you see that the people break it out into social development, health, education. You know, we're broken into different silos and we're planning separately when we know in Indigenous communities, they all are one and they all are together. So if you were to do planning for any one of those departments and you took the title off the cover, they would all want the same thing for community. And so when we're planning, you know, if we need to do silos or if we need to take that sectored approach, if that's what feels comfortable right now, especially giving direction for work plans for managers who are head of those departments. One of the things that we did was we sent a notice out, we put it on Facebook, social media, and in our newsletter that we were going to be hosting sessions once a week over 7 weeks. And each week was a different topic. So week 1 was education, week 2 was health, week 3 was economic development, week 4 was health. And under each one, we asked like 2 or 3 main questions. So people knew what we were going to be asking. And then we also gave like some background information on where our community was at so that people could think about it and process it. And whatever they were passionate about, they could show up at those sessions and have a conversation. So, and then after that, we did family meetings where our planning team broke out and we hosted family meetings throughout the community. And we gave those families a $200 Safeway card so that they could host a big family dinner and get some prizes and stuff for their families. And they could note take, or we could bring a note taker to them to capture the information. But we had end of the year money, which is why we were able to offer those big gift cards for the families. But so that's how we started. You know, we started in the beginning was just going out to community, talking to as many people as we could, the youth, the elders, the men, the women, you know, and hosted different sessions. And then after that, we would move in and look at some topics and sectors and departments. And then after that, we moved into the family meetings. And we were keeping track of all of the people we were connecting with, and then taking note of the people who didn't come to meetings. And then we phoned them and we said, can we make a house visit? And so we would go, and those visits were anywhere from 2 to 4 hours of just visiting and listening to them. And just that feeling of inclusion, that you just saw how excited they got when they saw you writing down notes, that you were actually listening to them. So, you know, it's all about the process. I know so many times we worry about the end product and what the document is going to look like and how we're going to capture it. And if I was able to whisper in your ear along your journey, it would be trust the process. Trust your people. They are going to lead you exactly where you need to go. And as you have meetings and you look at your notes, you'll see the action items that kind of float to the top and what they want to do and where they want to take it. And then you implement those. And, you know, it becomes your baby because you're so invested in it, but you also need to understand there's a part where you're going to have to let go, and let it live on its own. And that, you know, becoming an expert in your community means that sometimes you think you know the direction you're going into, and then all of a sudden the community is going to plop in and then take it in a totally different direction. And my heart would break when that would happen, because I'd have all this work done and I have to write it off and then go in this other way. But once it's completed, people will stand behind it and find ways to bring that plan forward. We've had some really turbulent years in our community. We've had some rough spots, but our community plan is still living because people are incorporating it in different ways that they do work, or they refer to it. You know, for the first term, our chief and council kept our CCP on the boardroom table and referred to it as their Bible. All of the managers had the CCP in their offices. They had it in the lobbies in our communities. And we would take snippets and share it with community every once in a while. Or when a decision was made about something, they would refer to the CCP as, this came from our CCP, and so we went with it. And so it continues to live on, even though there's not somebody in there driving it or holding it. You know, if you didn't look closely, you might think it's sitting on a shelf, but there's so much work in our community that continues to move forward because we involved people in this way. And it's about the process. And as long as you have a good, inclusive, engaging, safe process for your people to be involved in, you don't need an implementation plan. You don't need an action plan, because people will see things in it that they will get excited about, and they will carry some of those things forward. You know, and it will live that way, and you're not going to be able to measure it. And so, you know, as you move through this, I really encourage you to think about your stories, you know, the stories of your families and the way you've always done things. Some communities don't have a strong connection to their stories. They're still bringing them back and still remembering them. But our people have those stories inside of us, because in our communities and in our families, there's a way we've always done things with no explanation. I don't know why we do this. We just do things this way. And that is your teachings that have lived through generations, still coming through to you. And so taking the time to really think about those things. What are the things that we just do? What are the things that we don't have an explanation for, but we just do because that's the way it's always been done? Those teachings come from some place. And they usually go back to your stories and to your creation stories and to your language on why you do things and why your family makes decisions that way. And so, you know, my part here is, Kira, do you know how much time we have left?
The session goes until 10:30.
Okay, good. So what I would like to do now is to just take a break for a bit. And I want you to do some journaling. And so you can step away from your computer if you'd like to for the next 10 minutes. And just think about some of the things that you've heard, how you might incorporate it into your communications or engagement plan. Think about some of your own stories or your own teachings that you might have heard, and how you could utilize those to be your foundation as you move forward. And, you know, the Anaukin was shared with us by Dr. Jeanette Armstrong, who was the executive director for the Anaukin Center in Penticton. She's now retired, but still continues to do amazing work. But her and her brother, Richard Armstrong, were always so generous with their teachings, and had planners come in from all over the country to learn this process with them. And they said, take what you need and leave what you don't. And so whatever you've heard from this process, it doesn't belong to any one person. If you can find ways to utilize this in the work that you do, please feel free to do so. I've shared the diagram that we use on our Slack channel. So if you even want to print that and refer to that, and find ways to build off of that, you're totally welcome to do that. So we'll take a bit of a break for about 10 minutes here, and then we'll come back and just, share for the last 10 minutes. Okay, so we'll come back in about a minute, and then I'm going to open it up for just some discussion for people who might like to share their thoughts or questions. We can do that for the last 10 minutes of our session. One thing I wanted to add right from the beginning that I didn't talk about or share with is virtual sessions. So I have actually, from all of the sessions that I've been facilitating online, I now do a limit for participation. And so I limit my sessions for 20 to 25 people max, just because that is enough time to get the voices of everybody that's on the call heard, so that they feel like they've contributed in a meaningful way. Also, you can see everybody's cameras when you limit it to 20 to 25. My favorite sessions are the sessions that have 6 to 10 people. And if you're able to limit it to 25 and under, your meetings can stay within, an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. I have done 4.5 hours sessions using an Aukinwich and have done breaks every hour for 10 to 15 minutes. So people will be able to step away from their computers. And then just one more tip that I like to use. As people sign in, if you have a group of 30 and under, you can actually keep track of people who are signing in. And so, or you can go down your participant list. So as people sign in, you can write their names down and make your own list of names. And that will be your virtual circle. So then when you start, you can say, welcome to our virtual circle. I'd like to read the names of the people who are in the circle in the order that we'll be going in. So it'll be Glenn, Lauren, Henry, Jamie, Cleo, Debbie, Isabel, Angie, Shelley, because we don't see the screens the same. And that way, as a facilitator, you'll have a list of the people who are there. And then you can just call on people that way. So we'll start with Glenn. And then after Glenn will be Lauren, and then Lauren, then Henry. And so, there's some format to help you move through your conversation more quickly. So I just wanted to give that tip for facilitating virtual circles. It's really helped me, and to try to limit your sessions to 25 and under, and just hold more sessions so that you can have a really good conversation with people. So I'm going to put myself on mute. And just going to read this. My role at FPCC is a language revitalization coach, and we promote some common planning processes. We do have an academic bureaucratic alternative, but we strongly promote traditional planning ways as a guide to process. Example, 4 directions, potlatch, 4 food chiefs, or the different ways we all have. Awesome. So I am going to put myself on mute, and if you want to turn your video on so that I know you'd like to share, and we'll do it that way. So you can turn your video on and then ask a question or share your thoughts or anything.
Good morning, Elaine. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was beautiful. It's always good to get a refreshing at SFU, and it's definitely a beautiful planning tool. And I just wanted to say, some of the things that resonate with me in terms of community planning, comprehensive community planning, is ensuring that there's a sense of belonging You know, I think about, you know, the factions within the community in terms of, for example, culture. There are some people that are very strong participatory people in our ceremonies, and then there's, you know, others that are not. And I think, you know, being Haysjuk or Healthsick is, you know, our culture is very much alive, and those that also live off the land and waters. They're taking care of families and exercising our values of sharing and reciprocity. So what I would love to capture is to ensure that, you know, we are healthy no matter where we are. You know, everybody, you know, has different gifts, different knowledge, different experience to bring to this planning process. And I really value, you know, the conversations around working in silos. I think collaborative governance is going to bode us all well, and we're going to go a long way. I love that the One Nation uses their CCP as their Bible, as they should. For me, CCP, it's a blueprint for our future, and it's designed by and for the people, with a strong reach of community engagement for their input into what that blueprint for our future looks like. I also wanted to ask, so just get clarification on the virtual piece around the advice for, I love, you know, the recommendation to keep it to 20 to 25. I think that's great. We have a huge community, about 2,500 people, about 14 living on reserve. So I think, you know, like for us, it might be valuable to, you know, do focus groups. But for the engagement piece on the virtual meeting, so you mentioned that you're looking at your screen. Are you doing a conversation and then like grouping it into a section and then opening it up for questions or participation afterwards, or how does that work best? What's the best practice?
All my sessions start with Stimat Spo'us, what is on your heart? And then we do a circle of introductions for people to share what's on their heart. And I'll read out the virtual circle from my list. And then we'll do some presentations, we'll do some breakouts. And then at the end, we will open it up for people just to share as they wish.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Elaine.
Yeah. I think Paul and then Cyrilina, if you'd like to share.
Thanks, Elaine. Always listening. Love listening to your stories. And I just wanted to make a comment. And I know a lot of the people are probably new to CCP. And, you know, I think that the community engagement is probably one of the first overwhelming elements of, oh my God, I got to talk to so many people, and I only know my little family, or I only know my little reserve, I only know my little group. But I think back to the story where you started your CCP, and you were at your desk and there, you know, from 9 to 5, and finally figured out, or was pushed out into the community, and it can be overwhelming. But I think it's always important. I mean, if you're taking a lens of a project management, you're thinking of a linear project, where this is the farthest thing from linear that you can get. There's spirals, and there's stepping back and moving forward and stepping back again. So I think those should be considered part of the path, and not failures or challenges, but it's the way that you're going to make connections and relationships, and doing it right the first time is, you don't learn as much as if you fall down and dust yourself off again. So I don't want those challenges that you come up against are all learning opportunities. So I think it's just important to keep that in mind as you're on your journey. Yeah, just something that I've seen in working with communities. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And Cyrilina?
Good morning.
So this is really, really good information. I haven't actually worked on our comprehensive community plan, but I participated in some of the activities around collecting information. And I'm a social butterfly. I love to be around people. I love to coordinate things. So I took a lot of notes when you were talking about coming together, planning together, working together, hosting weekly meetings, one topic each. Um, the fact that the document is a living document, it can and will change. But what really, really stood out for me was communicate, communicate, communicate. Giving each department a copy and having the departments share snippets and often of where they are in the comprehensive community plan. And thank you so much for the information on the virtual meetings. I've attended a lot of Zoom meetings, but we haven't hosted any. And so if we're going to do more work on community planning, it will be virtual. So this information is so important, and thank you so much for sharing it. Hi, Leona. I want to say hello, but I also want to say thank you for the gentle reminder this morning of including culture and ceremony, and how this gives a sense of belonging. That was a really good gentle reminder for me today. And I usually do have culture on my mind, but this morning I was like so into the community planning. I was like really happy to hear you remind me of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy?
Masicho, thank you very much for those words of wisdom, Elaine. It just it's the second time I heard you, and I've learned so much. But I think the basis of everything is the individual, and if finding out what being are they, and being self-aware. Okay, I may be a traditionalist, and I can see why so-and-so drives me absolutely nuts. But again, being aware of that, but just the importance of including all four ways of being within a community plan. Because if we just do it on, say, the traditional side, 3/4 of your community could be left out, and how they won't support that plan. It would just die if you don't have everyone involved. And just keeping everyone establishing a sense of safety and acknowledging that, okay, there's times that I cannot get past the fact that I see this person as a fly, as an insect, that I just want to smack them, So again, taking the step back and again, having your planning team say, okay, so-and-so Ken sees this person as innovative. He doesn't see him as a fly. So just in terms of, I guess, establishing that critical foundation for your community plan and community engagement, and people feeling safe. Again, to create a safe space, you need to be safe, and just being aware of who you are and what your triggers might be. And just so, Masicho, again, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Kathy. Stephanie?
Hello. I don't, it's kind of like a thought and a question. Sometimes we like move so fast, and I just want to make sure, or like if there's ideas of making sure that people's voices still feel heard after we've achieved some of the objectives, because then it's like boom, 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 we just keep on moving on. And sometimes like the community doesn't even realize that we've achieved some of these objectives, even if we're putting it out in the annual reports. But just trying to have that connection of making sure that, oh yeah, it was done. If anybody has any ideas.
I know a lot of people share celebrate. So just celebrate every little thing. We had a big celebration when the community was when our community plan was done. We had a big celebration and we had cake and everything, and we gave out the plan. And then people just continue to celebrate different things, and it's in our community plan to celebrate. So, you know, to constantly uplift people and to share our role models and to like show our successes, and, you know, to start focusing on the positive piece of the work that our community is doing. And so there's a lot of different ways I know communities have continued to keep it alive. And sometimes communities not going to understand that that it came from the work that they had done. And sometimes that's, you know, and sometimes that's okay, you know, as long as it continues to live and as long as people continue to feel good about what's happening in the community, I think. So we've got about 42 seconds. I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. I'm going to do a selfless promotion of my book. I wrote a book called Calling My Spirit Back. And I actually wrote it because people kept asking me, how do we begin to heal? And I couldn't answer it simply, so I wrote a book about it. And you can find it on Amazon and Chapters Indigo. You can order it online. It's called Calling My Spirit Back, Elaine Alec. And I share the 4 necessary conditions and the 4 protocols at the end of my book. Thanks, everybody.